Now I want to have a look at hypocrisy and tolerance. I'm going to spend a couple videos on that. Tolerance, of course, is a very important concept in the history of political philosophy. John Locke wrote his famous letter on tolerance. And today, people talk about tolerance a lot, right? And regard it as an important virtue, right? One should always be tolerant, right? And yeah, that's intrinsically very appealing. We shouldn't be discriminating against people and all that kind of stuff. We should be tolerant. That sounds great. Let's do it. And people in the past, they were, one of the main complaints is people were so intolerant of each other. Differences in a variety of ways. People were punished and because people were intolerant. Okay, so let's have a little look at this. Is tolerance necessarily a good thing? We've seen that hypocrisy can have this kind of ambiguous moral status. Sometimes it seems that, yeah, you can make a case for it, as we talked earlier about the person doing in a previous video. Have a look at the one just prior to this, where I talked about, there might be cases we could construct that are not that unusual, where someone could say, I had a right to behave in a hypocritical manner. How does that play into these arguments regarding tolerance? So moral status of hypocrisy, not clear. Tolerance seems to be a good thing. But, not everybody thinks it necessarily is, but let's have a look a little bit more about tolerance. And let's start with trying to get a little bit of a handle on what tolerance is. We could start with something like this. This is sort of a kind of an operational definition. X is tolerant. One person is tolerant of another. If you say, oh yeah, I'm tolerant of Joe or other people because, I don't interfere in their lives, right? Joe, he does his thing, and I'm not going to interfere in what he does. Basically, it's a live and let live. So the society is tolerant because we just live and let live. We don't interfere, right? We don't block people because of who they are and what they do and all that kind of stuff. No, we don't do that. Well, that's okay. That's a start. That's sort of a pure indifference model, right? Now, that's also compatible with admiration. I could really admire everything Joe does and not interfere. He does his thing. I think it's great. Would you want to say, though, that I'm tolerating Joe if I highly approve of him? If you highly approve of people but you don't interfere, would you say you're a tolerant person? That seems to not really satisfy the intuitions of what tolerance is about. There seems to be something missing. And what's missing might be something like this we want to add. Look, when you're really talking about I tolerate something, it's kind of like when you say, yeah, like it's really hot in here, but I can tolerate the heat, right? I'm not indifferent to it, because if someone said, would you like me to turn the air conditioning on, or would you like me to open the window and cool it off? You'd say yes, but I can hack it. I can tolerate it. So it's got something negative involved, but you may not be able to do, or you may not be willing to do, but yeah, I'm just going to sit here and I'll tolerate the heat. So in this example here, what we're really talking about, it seems to sort of the way that we use the term tolerance, is that there's some kind of disapproval. Like Joe's doing his thing. Hey, it's not my cup of tea, and I don't necessarily approve it, but I tolerate that he does it. I'm not going to interfere. Now, you might say, well, who are you to do that? Oh, fine. That's another question. But I think that from a philosophical sort of a kind of a linguistic angle, how do people use the term tolerance, or use it when they're tolerating? It's usually about something that they're not terribly fond of, which is why a lot of activist groups don't necessarily ask for mere toleration. They don't like that, because then that could be saying, yeah, I accept that what I'm doing is wrong in some way. No. Lots of times, you think about, lots of groups will say, no, we're not out for toleration. We want acceptance, even to the point of celebration. Okay, these are stronger terms than mere tolerance. So tolerance is kind of a weaker version, but it's certainly stronger than indifference, right? Because indifference kind of can go all over the map, right? You can be indifferent to things you like and indifferent to things you don't like. But tolerance seems to be a non-interference about things you're not too crazy about. So if we just bump this up a level from the individual to society, then society tolerates something that it may not like that much. It's not being indifferent to it. It may not like it. And that's kind of what we mean when we say, oh yeah, we have a tolerant society. So, and we usually mean that, one of the contexts that we often use this in is free speech, right? Typically, when we say I'm in favor of free speech, people that are really hardcore in favor of free speech, they'll say, yeah, I'll tolerate it, which means that I won't interfere even if people are saying something that I absolutely hate and disagree with. I'll still support the right to say it. I'm not completely indifferent because I hate what the person's saying, but and I disapprove of it, but I'll still support it, so I'm tolerating it. So I think that's the idea, that really when we're talking about, it's not mere indifference or live and let live. It's like, yeah, despite I'm live and let live despite the fact that I don't like what's going on. Now you might say that's awfully subjectivist. Sure, even if we bump it up, it might be cultural relativism going on here. Or if we take a more hardline moral realism, you might even say, look, I believe, I make the argument that things are intrinsically right and wrong, but I will still intolerate people doing things that I think are intrinsically morally right and wrong. Anyways, there's a number of ways that we can analyze it, but it seems to tolerance seems to involve some kind of, as some philosophers say, some kind of something that's disapproved of or is morally unacceptable or intrinsically wrong. Okay. Now, liberalism, as I mentioned at the top of the video, tolerance has been a big part of liberalism, and again, it seems to be something that a lot of people agree with today. Let's look back to a famous thinker in the history of philosophy, and not only just like philosophy in general, metaphysics and epistemology and all that stuff, but also a very important figure in British thought and political thought, John Locke. John Locke gives us a pragmatic argument for tolerance, right? He doesn't stop there, but he starts with a pragmatic argument. And I'm simplifying his discussion a lot for our purposes here, for this little video. Basically, it's discrimination against a pragmatic argument for toleration. If there's discrimination against a group based on some characteristic X, what could happen? Well, if you discriminate against that, that could be a unifying factor of them. Oh, we're all discriminated against because of our green eyes. And then the green-eyed people will kind of get together, and they could, that might be the rallying cry, green-eyed people unite, and they could threaten the social order. So tolerance then seems to be a good thing. It's like, look, we're not going to get on the case of the green-eyed people. So what? Leave them alone, right? Because if you do hassle them, right, you could provoke some kind of negative reaction and a threat to the social order. There's a certain kind of weakness here, though, because it's not really a moral argument. Because it could be some property, like, I don't know, proclivity to gang violence or something like that. That would be unacceptable and unacceptably destructive to the social order. And if you didn't do something about it, your society would be in trouble. So it might be a pragmatic argument, could cut the other way. It could also be that something that's a moral predicate, like that you would be wrong to suppress, but the pragmatic argument would collapse in the face of, well, we'll just get rid of, then people have done this. People have just tried to get rid of groups or whatever that they didn't like. And that leads off into, genocide and all kinds of horrible actions that history is full of, unfortunately. So there is a kind of weakness in this pragmatic argument. It seems that, prima facie, it doesn't seem too bad. Yeah, it's a good idea. And that doesn't mean we have to just pitch it out, but it's not maybe as strong as we would like. Locke adds some more a moral dimension to this as well. And again, I'm simplifying his discussion. But, he thinks, well, look, we should also separate church and state. And I think this is a nice lead in to a broader kind of notion of discussing tolerance and hypocrisy. We want to separate church and state. Locke wants to do that for a variety of reasons, even though some of his writings, he's got some problems with Catholics and things like that. But we don't have to get into all of that. Locke says something like this. we want to avoid generating or creating the conditions for religious hypocrisy. Because if you demand that everyone be of a certain religion, you know what's going to happen. If they're not, if a person isn't of a certain religion, then they could suffer as a result of it. They could, suffer horribly, or they might suffer in terms of being denied opportunities or whatever. So, if you're Catholic and the Protestants are in power or vice versa, whatever, pick whatever you want. If the state says the religion is this, and if you want to occupy a high office, run for office or whatever, you have to be of that religion. Well, that's going to cause problems for a lot of people who aren't of that religion. And also what will happen is it'll generate a kind of religious hypocrisy. Locke said, look, you can't really control your beliefs like that, but you can sure act like you believe things. So people will basically fake it. They'll, yeah, I'm a religious believer. And we know there's lots of politicians, in order to court certain votes, they will act like they're very much part of that religion, or they believe its tenets or whatever. So this is a religious hypocrisy that Locke said, well, we probably can't get rid of that, but we could at least tone it down by saying, look, we're not going to have a state church or a state religion, so we can avoid. But we can now generalize this a little bit and sort of lump it in with liberalism writ large. And remember, this is small L liberalism, not political in the sense of like political parties that call themselves liberal. Let's do a little abstraction here. If we demand that everyone be X, right, like Catholic or Protestant or something like that, then you're going to generate that hypocrisy. If you demand everyone be religious, you'll generate a religious hypocrisy. Now we can extend it, plug in a different predicate. If you demand, right, with sexual orientation, right, if you demand everyone be straight, well, you're going to generate, for lack of a better term, this hetero hypocrisy. Or sometimes people say, people will try to pass. Sure, the same thing here. Hundreds of years ago, people might try to pass as being a part of the state religion, and they're not. Well, it's not surprising. The logic seems pretty straightforward. It doesn't seem wild to say that whatever predicate you put in here, and it has associated advantages or punitive measures or something, you're going to generate a hypocritical form of behavior that's connected to that predicate. So straight would generate heterohypocrisy, right? So if society demands you be straight, well, and you're not, well, then it's not surprising that a lot of people would try to act as if they are in order to avoid punishments or to gain things, right? And we saw this in a previous video where we talked about victim hypocrisy, and we said, okay, that doesn't seem that bad. But on the other hand, we don't want to have it where we're creating the conditions that create more hypocrisy. So within certain conditions of, let's say, oppressive nature, which we discussed in the previous video, such that oppression could create a certain kind of hypocrisy as a protective measure, and so that hypocrisy in that context is a good thing, why we might say, well, we don't necessarily say that's great, because we have a good thing going here with the hypocrisy. We'd say, no, the whole thing is problematic because of the oppressive structure. So in other words, if you get rid of this part, then you don't need this kind of hypocrisy, even if it within its context is still not that bad of a thing. So demand everyone be of a certain religion, you get religious hypocrisy. Get rid of that demand. Demand everyone be straight, you get this kind of thing, hetero hypocrisy. Get rid of that demand that everyone be straight. But it also, raises other questions which are a little bit more complicated, and I think are living questions today, because how far do you take these kinds of things? Because you can, in order to correct historical injustices, you might say, well, certain characteristics that were previously denigrated, we should not only just tolerate them now, but we might even favor them now. And so toleration might, talk about favoring things. Well, in that case, if you favor a characteristic cue, and I'm just generating this as a discussion point, if you favor a characteristic cue without denigrating not cue, you can generate a kind of greed hypocrisy. Imagine someone who's living in a society, and that society is stressing a certain predicate or property that person doesn't have, but that person is also living a great life. right? They're not suffering. They are living, you know, as some people say, a very privileged life and everything's going well. But they look at this and go, well, you know, my life is great right now, but I don't have this characteristic Q. I'm not suffering as a result of it, but if I had that characteristic Q, my life would go from great to awesome, right? Well, are we surprised that this kind of move is analogous to this, that it will generate a similar an analog as well, a kind of greed hypocrisy, where people will say, no, I'm not suffering as a result of society favoring this particular predicate, which I don't have, but I would just live better. I would get more job opportunities. I would get more stuff going. And so you can generate this greed hypocrisy. So the point seems to be that with liberals, they say, look, toleration, what we really want to do is stay away from elevating or denigrating characteristics. If we can do that, we'll get a better society. So liberalism tends to try and put the brakes and curb through its toleration the amount of hypocrisy in society. So what's the relationship here? Well, according to liberals, tolerance can help put limitations on hypocrisy, and that's a good thing. Now, let's consider, on the other hand, why some people say, no, actually, this might sound good, but liberalism is particularly prone to hypocrisy. In fact, it does generate it. And that's something that we'll look at in the next video. See you then.